how Roman coinage changed Germania. I'll just start off, for those of you who are not really too aware of the political geography of Germany at the time. Here a map of basically the frontier of the Roman Empire running through diagonally across Germany, and some of the important events on this timeline about what I'm talking about. The Emperor Augustus attempts to conquer Germany, and as we know, Varus loses his legions in the Teutoburg forest, and the Romans withdraw basically to the Rhine again. From 69, AD 69, the Emperor Vespasian starts to move across the Rhine in this re-entrant, this sort of triangle in southern Germany between the Rhine and the Danube, and builds the Limes frontier, which is marked in red on this slide. And for 200 years, this is very much part of the Roman Empire, villas, towns, and military stations. An interlude comes with the Marcomannic Wars, with Marcus Aurelius fighting across the middle Danube. We will see this has an effect on the area, although no hostilities took place within Germany. We will see it has an effect on the area and is a period that we need to bear in mind. Then from about 260, this frontier that had been built across the Rhine and Danube collapses. The area is gradually given up by Rome, and by the 4th century, the frontier has been moved back again to the Rhine and the Danube, marked here in blue. So that is basically the political military background to the area I'll be talking about today. Now, the first thing is to understand is the Barbaricum, and I will be talking about the German Barbaricum, is full of Roman coins. There are hundreds of thousands out there in Northern Europe. And here on the left, a histogram of what Roman coins we find up on the German Baltic coast in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, marked on the right in red. And the histograms are divided into the metals: gold at the top, silver in the middle, and bronze at the bottom. And what we can see essentially, and this is the bit I'm going to be talking about today, is a huge influx of 2nd century, late 1st century and 2nd century denarii coming into the Barbaricum. And there's also, if you can see my mouse here, there's a lot of late Roman gold, which I will touch on briefly, but that's not really what I want to talk about. It's going to be this huge influx of denarii that will be at the center of what I'm talking about. Now, to understand that, it's important that we compare what is going on outside the empire with what's going on inside the empire. And just the stars come up on the map to mark Alzey, which is a fairly typical small Roman town near the frontier in Germany. And if I look at the coins from Alzey, we can see what you get in a Roman town is very, very different to what you get outside the empire. Those early denarii of 2nd century denarii are extremely rare, and that late Roman gold, which is turning up in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, is very rare. We get a concentration instead on late 3rd and 4th century coinage, which we don't find outside the empire. So the first thing to understand is coins are not going out of the empire because they're there and just flowing across the frontier. There are quite clearly mechanisms which are controlling or directing the outflow of coins out of the empire into the Barbaricum. It's not just everyday exchange across the frontier. We can see that again when we look at gold coins. For example, we're getting this huge amount of silver and also a certain amount of bronze leaving the empire to go north in the 2nd century. If we look at the gold, for example, and compare on the right, we see the distribution of gold through the years outside the empire. It's not gold that's leaving. This is an interesting point. In this period we're talking about, it's not gold that's leaving the empire. Gold is going out much later. So we're looking again at a very much a silver-based phenomenon that I'll be talking about today. I will touch on the late Roman gold, but that's not the main thing. Now, okay, we got coins outside the empire, but what does this actually mean? There's a tendency to think coins are coins, and yeah, they're buying and selling things with the coins. This is what's going on. Now, in his book on the invention of coinage and monetization of ancient Greece, David Shapps actually says something really important. Occasionally, an invention succeeds so thoroughly that it changes permanently the terms in which society thinks. Money, particularly coined money, was another invention that irrevocably changed people's way of thought. And this is a problem with the way we look at coins are being used outside the empire. We have embedded in us this idea, yeah, you're paying wages, you're buying a beer, going shopping. This is what coins are for. But that is not how coins, and certainly not how money has been used in the past, how it's used today. So we have to I'd like to take a little step back from this idea of what coins are for. The first thing is, of course, money isn't always coins. There are all sorts of things that have been used as money, including bottom right, the famous Yap stones, which are money, but they're not being used in market exchange every day. In fact, the Yap stones stay where they are, even when they change ownership. People know who they belong to, but they're not actually being handed around. So many, many things have been used as money over the ages. And also to understand that coins aren't always money. They're very aerodynamic and are very popular with football fans, soccer fans, as Rio Ferdinand on the left found when he got hit by one while playing for Manchester United. They get used as jewelry. And one of my favorite examples comes from Poland, from the communist area. The question was, how do you double the value of a zloty? Drill a hole in it and sell it as a washer for 2 zlotys, because there weren't enough washers on the market. And this is actually what was being done. So money isn't always coins, coins aren't always money. We have to look at these objects with very, very new eyes. We also have to understand that advanced societies 5,000 or more years ago had complex economies long before the invention of coinage. Early Iron Age societies of Mesopotamia had redistributive economies that did not use coins, but relied on credit and silver bullion in carefully measured units. The cuneiform tablets, these clay tablets with writing pressed in basically with a chisel, they are all, and most of them are accounts. Actually, you could actually see the cost, the price, the amount in these cuneiform tablets. That's what they were mainly being used for. Some of these are 5,000 years old. These societies had very complex monetary economies, no coins. And also what is becoming clear, that Bronze Age Europe, which we might think of as being very primitive still, actually seems to have had standard units of measure being used across Europe. This has been quite an exciting or unexpected discovery. So we know that advanced societies had these complex economies, but what were such pre-coinage systems used for? How did these systems work? Now, the German archaeological magazine Archaeologie in Deutschland had an issue called Weights, Ingots, and Coins, from barter to paying. And running through this is very much the idea, well, if they didn't have coins, then they practiced barter. They exchanged things. Now, it's very important at this point to understand what we mean by barter and what level. Are we talking about barter at high-level exchange of traders coming with a boatload or a wagon load of goods, or are we talking about everyday exchange in the market? And there is a tendency to think, well, they were using, well, here are 2 shoes and I'd like a pound of steak. We'll come back to that in a minute, but this is a thing that runs through, historically runs through thought on coins. It starts really with Aristotle talking about acquisition, and he's talking at this thing about barter. I hope you can see the mouse here. Barter, he's talking about interchanges, barter, the practice of barter, an article of exchange. He's thinking very much about this everyday exchange, and to give and accept some substance of such a sort as being itself useful, a useful commodity, was easy to handle in use for general life. Iron, for example, silver and other metals, at the first stage defined merely by size and weight, but also finally by impressing on it a stamp in order that this might relieve them of having to measure it. The idea was it's very difficult to buy a pound of steak with a pair of shoes, because if the butcher doesn't want shoes, he's not going to take them. So Aristotle sees barter was a little difficult, a little complex. It didn't really work, so they invented coinage. So there's this idea of basically replacing something with coins. And Adam Smith, on his inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, says very much the same sort of thing. But when the division of labor first began to take place, this power of exchanging must frequently have been very much clogged and embarrassed in its operations. When someone's working down the mines, he hasn't got anything he's producing in order to buy things. A farmer can go to the market with his grain and come back with other things, but someone working down the mines, it gets difficult. He doesn't have any produce he can use. And so to prevent such abuses, to facilitate exchanges, and thereby to encourage all sorts of industry and commerce, it has been found necessary to affix a public stamp upon certain quantities of such particular metals. So again, the idea here is that because everyday exchange was difficult, you invent coins. It's also very interesting. Aristotle and Adam Smith have the same argument. Aristotle uses the argument to prove that making money out of trade is not natural and moral. Adam Smith uses the same argument to prove that actually it is exactly moral and it's what creates wealth. It's the basis of modern capitalism. So the two use the same argument to go off in very different directions. Now, when we come to barter, there is a very interesting book by David Graeber called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And he has in this book a chapter called The Myth of Barter. And he explains that anthropologists have nowhere in the world ever found a system which relies on barter for everyday exchange. This idea of using shoes to buy a pound of steak has never, ever been the situation. So what we have to think about is that there are societies, very complex societies with money, but it's not being used for market exchange in the way that we use coin today. And this comes back to the point David Schaap made, that we have to get out of this modern mindset of what coins and money are and really open ourselves up to different thoughts. So let's come and look at a few ways people have thought about coins. Karl Polanyi, a Hungarian-Austrian economic historian, came up with an interesting difference between general purpose and special purpose money. He essentially says that money can have 5 functions: means of exchange, method of payment, standard of value, store of wealth, and unit of account. And he says general purpose money can do all of these things. And this is what our money is today. It can do all of these things, and it can be used across So you can use it as a means of exchange, but then use the same money as a method of payment. So it can cross between these uses. But special purpose money will only be used for one or two of these functions, and will generally not be used crossing between them. So, and he says that early or primitive monies, he does call them primitive, or early, I think actually is the word he prefers to use, are special purpose money. They're not being used for all five, they're only being used for one or two. And generally speaking, it's as a method of payment and as a store of wealth. So we're starting to get this idea of money being used very differently. And another very interesting approach was taken by Jonathan Parry and Maurice Bloch, who looked at different transactional orders. The idea that within a society, there are two different spheres of transactions. One of them is concerned with, well, called the reproduction of the long-term social or cosmic order. So keeping society as it is, controlling society, and the other short-term transactions concerned with an arena of individual competition, i.e. going to the market and buying and selling things, exchanging things. So here we have an idea of two separate ideas. One is it's part of what glues society together at a very broad scale, but also then it's what people do on everyday circumstances. And they have a couple of very nice examples from recent societies where you can actually see how this works. So we're starting to look at money working in a very, very different way to how we see it. And for money is for us today coins. Okay, it's getting to credit cards, but most of us, I think, still remember what coins are. We're getting to a very different situation. And David Graeber actually then sums this up very nicely. He talks about social currency. So this is kind of the long-term transactional order, what glues society together. And he says, often such currencies are never used to buy and sell anything at all. Instead, they're used to create, maintain, and otherwise reorganize relationships between people, to arrange marriages, establish the paternity of children, etc., etc. And he calls them social currencies, and the economies that employ them, human economies. This, in a way, is talking about money on the level of Parry and Bloch, about this glue that holds society together. But social currency, human economy, is a very nice way of putting it. And then he adds, historically, commercial economies, market economies. So the everyday exchange, as we now like to call them, are a relative newcomer. So we're getting again to this idea of primitive monies, a time when monies were being used in a way very differently to how they're being used today. And this is a distinction that we're going to slowly see as we come out of the Roman Empire. It also brings in two very important points: the difference between reciprocal and non-reciprocal. A market economy, everyday coin use, is reciprocal. Here's a tenner, where's my beer? You get something in exchange. If I pay a fine, I don't get anything back. It's going one way. If I'm paying money to my landlord, it's going one way. Okay, I can live in my flat, and if I pay the fine, I don't go to prison, but it's not reciprocal in the same way. There is a power relationship controlling the two. In the market, people are acting as equals. And it's also a question of personal and impersonal. Primitive monies are personal. I pay the fine to a person. I need to know the person, the magistrate or the chief or whoever, or I pay my rent to my landlord. It's a personal relationship we have. But in the market, it's impersonal. It doesn't matter who the person is selling the beer, who the barman is. It doesn't matter. Market exchange can be impersonal, but these primitive human economies are very much personal economies. So anyway, let's look at some coins. Now, we already saw that there's a huge difference between the coins we're finding outside the empire and inside the empire. We looked at this, the difference between the Baltic, German Baltic on the left, and outside within the empire on the right. So the period I'm going to talk about mainly is the period where the Augustan coinage system from 18 BC to about AD 270, 260 was functioning. At the end, not terribly well. And we've got the five main five main denominations: the gold aureus, the silver denarius, the sestertius and dupondius in brass, which have been very yellow, and the ass copper, which will have been red. And we have this relationship between them. So I think everyone knows this. This is the coinage I'm going to be looking at. Now, if I look at the coins outside the empire for this period, I find that they are dominated by the denarius, by the silver coin. Looking at Germany as a whole and looking at the single finds, so not hoards, I'm excluding hoards. If we're looking at the single finds, coins which have been, well, to describe them as lost is maybe a little not quite right, but these are not sort of deliberate huge complexes have been deposited. Over 50% of the coins are denarii. Now, if I compare that distribution with an area within the empire on the left, so basically Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and then look at them at different settlement types. So on the left, we have the towns, the small towns, rural settlements and villas within the Roman Empire. And if we look at that blue column, which is in the denarius, we see 10% of the coins in the towns are denarii. In the villas, it's just above 20%. So as you get away from the town into the countryside, you're getting fewer small units, small denominations, and more larger denominations. But there it's important to understand people didn't mean that the people in the villas didn't have small change. It can mean that they used the small change in the town when they went to market and lost it there. They're not actually using it on the villa. That's an important thing, but it does suggest that the more rural you get, the less small change you have. But if we compare this to what we've got up in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, up on the Baltic coast, nearly 80% of the coins are denarii. It is quite clear that the coins are being used in a very, very different way outside the empire. You can't buy a beer with a denarius. At least it's quite, yeah, they must be used in a very, very different way. We're not talking about everyday exchange at the market. We're talking about something very, very different that's going on outside the empire. And we can start to see this a little if we look at the difference between the number of, or the percentage of coins in the single finds that I showed you outside the empire on the right here, just over 50%. And if we look at the hoards, over 90% of the coins in the hoards are denarii. So we're starting to see preferential use of denarii for hoarding as a storage of wealth. And if you remember, storage of wealth was one of those functions of coinage that Polanyi defined in his work of his 5. Storage of wealth was one of those characteristics of coinage. And we're starting to see here a primitive or kind of money here, not general purpose, but special purpose money in the parlance of Polanyi. We're already starting to see money being used in coins being used in a very special way. And this is a map from Arik Dmovsky showing you, I mean, these hoards of denarii are being found right across from Scotland through Western, through into Eastern, Northern Europe. It's a massive feature of the way denarii are being used. And here, just comparing again, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, the hoards, and comparing it with the empire. What we're seeing here is coins, these denarii being used obviously in a very different way to how they're being used in the empire. Okay, so we get an idea something special is happening. Now, let's come back to this one again. We're looking at the denarii on the left, well, marked here with this sort of pinkish band. And an important point to note is the cutoff date of this pinkish band. It's just before 200, just before AD 200. And if I look at just the hoards, you can see here too, there is a cutoff date in the coins leaving of the coins going out of the empire into the Barbaricum. So here, let's look again at that, the coinage outside the empire. And this red line marks the date 194, AD 194. And we can see this cutoff or this denarii dropping down. Now, in 194, Septimius Severus reduced the silver content of the denarius from 68% to 46%, i.e. by a third. And traditionally, traditionally scholars have said it's quite simple. The Germani didn't like the bad coins, and so in exchange, trade with the empire, they refused to accept later coins. Visually, you can't really tell the difference of these coins. They would have to be extremely good at working out the fineness of coin to be able to do that. This was very much the traditional view. But if you compare the profile of those denarii outside the empire with the profile of denarii within the empire, this is the light blue band, the denarii, and this is Mainz, so the capital of Germania, Germania Superior, a provincial capital, a legionary fortress. This is an important Roman town. And again, we've got that date, 194. And when they drop off outside the empire, it's a huge jump within the empire. Suddenly, along the Rhine, we're getting masses of denarii coming in. So we've got to look at a different explanation of why the denarii no longer leave the empire. Now, not only did Septimius Severus reduce the amount of silver, in the northwest, he started to pay the military in denarii and not in bronze, because if you look at the bronze coinage in Mainz at the same time, suddenly no bronze coinage is arriving in Mainz. This is because whereas before pay was a mixture of silver and bronze, now it's only in silver. So he now needs a lot of silver to pay his soldiers. Not only that, he doubled military pay. Yeah. And so what it seems to have been, what happened is that Septimius Severus decided no coin is going to leave the empire. It's going to stay in the empire. And this brings us to another interpretation. And this is now the more widely accepted interpretation of why coinage denarii were leaving the empire. It was not through trade and exchange. So getting away from the idea of how coins are generally used, but because the Roman Empire was paying subsidies to the Germans in order to secure the frontier, to ensure peace on the frontier. They were basically being paid to protect the Roman Empire and not to invade it. But Septimius Severus, whose power was very much based on the army, says, no, I need that silver for my soldiers. I am no longer going to pay subsidies outside the empire, at least not to the same extent. We then see, and again, we're now seeing a function of coinage, it's payment. And again, that's one of the two aspects. We had storage of wealth and payment in Polanyi's idea of special purpose money, and it's what Graeber with his human economies and social currencies see, storage of wealth and payment. This is, we're starting to get to grips with the way coinage is being used. Now, another interesting point is that these denarii stay in circulation for an incredible length of time. This hoard from Lengerich was buried certainly no earlier than 350 AD. There is a coin of Magnentius down here with it, and the gold, a typical late Roman gold. These, on the left, you have denarii. These coins were not being used in the empire for 100 years, but they're still being used outside the empire. Lengerich is not the only example. Laatzen near Hanover has coins of the 360s, 370s marked in red, but also old denarii. So these denarii are staying in circulation for a very long time. And the amazing example is the burial of the Frankish king Childerich, AD 481, who had denarii and a lot of denarii. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly how many because the coins are lost, but there is a publication. We know there are a lot. There were a lot of denarii in his grave over 200 years after denarii had disappeared from circulation in the Roman Empire. So these denarii are being used outside the empire for a very, very long time. What also happens is imitations of denarii are being produced outside the empire. This is a phenomenon from outside. It's not imitations from inside the empire. These imitations are being made outside. So we have denarii being used for a long time, the Germans deciding to make their own, not in large numbers, but and some of them are struck, some of them are cast imitations, in the middle some official coins. Here's some more examples of what these imitations can look like. Some of them are also in gold or even gold plated, a bottom right example. These all come from Mecklenburg-Vorpommern up on the Baltic coast. And here are some more examples of some cast coins, and I'll be coming to the two on the right a little later. Now, casting of coins is something we know from the Roman Empire, but typically it's coins made of a copper tin alloy, which will have been white and silvery, but contains no silver. This is the way they did it in the Roman Empire. But when we leave the Roman Empire, it gets quite interesting. Now, these two coins were found at the same site in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. And these are quite interesting because they are cast not from the same mold, but the molds used to make them were made from the same Roman coin. So an indication of production on site. So someone was sitting there with a Roman denarius of Commodus making molds to produce cast coins. And you can see this if you look at here. You can actually see the rim of the coin that was being used to make those molds. And you can see it's the same coin because actually there is that, for example, one of the letters there has got lost off the coin. We're getting the same mistakes. So this is the first indication of production of cast coins up on the German Baltic coast. And then recently a metal detector produced this stuff. And the third coin from the left is something that went wrong, badly wrong in production. And you're starting to think, production on site. I asked the metal detectorist, has he evidence of metal working on site? And he came up with this lot of stuff as well. A couple of bits of hack silver, which I believe you had from Trap Rain Law recently, but also little bits of cast metal. And so we decided to do some metal analyses because within the Roman Empire, the cast coins are made of tin and copper, but no, these cast coins are made of very good silver. The one on the right is a typical Roman Empire product. They're doing that as well. But what we're seeing is coins, high quality coins being produced up there. Actually, the quality of the silver is better than the coinage within the Roman Empire. If you remember, Septimius Severus is down to less than 50% of silver, and we're looking at really good silver content here. We then looked at the little bits of hack silver and the little remains of little silver droplets. Again, high level of silver. So we got some high level silversmithing going on here. And here just in a table, just bringing this thing together, the cast coins, the casting waste and the hack silver. Now, unfortunately, we have no archaeological context for this. This is metal detecting finds. So I can't really date it. I don't know. But the traditional interpretation is that Roman coins, Roman denarii, were melted down to make silver objects outside the empire. But here we're having Roman objects, and I think that hack silver probably comes from, and I'll come to that in a moment, from Roman silver plate, for example, to make coins. It's actually going the other way. So what we're seeing is a demand after Severus has stopped paying silver out of the empire, a demand for silver coins. They want them. They're starting to make them, and they're making them of rather good metal. And the interesting thing is there's a very famous passage in Tacitus where he talks about how the Germans use coins, but the bit that tends to be neglected is vessels of silver are indeed to be seen among them, which have been presented to their ambassadors and chiefs. Tacitus tells us that the Germans are getting loads and loads of Roman silver vessels. And my suggestion is that they're melting down Roman silver vessels to make their coins. We'll have to do some very detailed meta-analyses of these silver imitations and the hack silver to check up on this, to compare it with typical Roman silver plates. But that's, we're going to be doing the analyses later this year. And wait for the results on that. But what we're starting to see is the production of imitations outside the empire. The earliest datable productions, or the earliest datable context with imitations, comes from the bog deposit of Illerup-Ordal, where the equipment of a defeated warband is deposited in the bog, and it's AD 205. So they're later than AD 205, and we know that they're being produced in the early 4th century because, apologies for the photos, but the bottom right, you've got an imitation of a gold aureus of Diocletian, reverse die-linked with an imitation of a denarius of Lucius Verus. So this denarius of Lucius Verus was being produced in the early 4th century. So we have a long production of this stuff. And what we seem to have is a reaction to the break in the supply of denarii under Septimius Severus. There was a significant demand for silver coinage. And what has happened is that this huge outflow of denarii has led to the establishment of a system for the storage and circulation of wealth and payment based on Roman denarii. And this system, and basically this outflow of denarii was so large that it actually triggered demand and triggered the production of imitations. And this was going on, production into the early 4th, and this system of denarii was still running at least into the 5th century, long after denarii have disappeared from within the empire. And it's quite interesting to see how it's used. Illerup-Ordal, the bog deposit, where it's reckoned that probably about 1,000 equipment of about 1,000 warriors was deposited, but only 24 of those warriors had coins with them. So these coins are for very special people, for very special use. They're not for everybody. I'm going to have to move on a little quicker here, I see. Also, these imitations are great fun because you can actually attribute them to individual dies. And if two coins are die-linked, they were produced together. But we're starting to get this enormous network of die-linked coins, already known about a little earlier, but now we're getting masses of material from the Ukraine, and we're getting die-links running from the Ukraine to Sweden. This massive network is being built across Northern Europe now, looking at die-links between imitations. Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, I can link 3 coins to Ukraine or even Russia. The imitations are die-linked. There's a massive network of exchange. So this network of exchange, basically, we're seeing running right across Northern Europe, running well into the 4th, 5th century. But I talked about silver, but very briefly gold. Gold is used differently. Gold tends to be pierced, and these gold imitations down here at the bottom, these 5, all from the same die, the hole is in the die. They are not pierced after production. They are produced as pierced. If you look very closely where the hole is, it's always in exactly the same place. So gold is being used to be worn as an ornament. Yeah, those are the coins. And interestingly enough, Kirill Mizgin looked at the orientation of the holes on Roman gold coins found outside the empire, and they're mainly pierced to be worn so the emperor's head is the right way up. This is something we also find on the large number of Roman medallions, late Roman gold medallions found outside the empire, which are then framed or looped or pierced outside the empire. That is, they go out as medallions and then repurposed with these frames and loops, again, so the emperor's head to be seen. These are diplomatic gifts going outside the empire, and whereas the silver's being used in storage of wealth and payment, gold becomes a prestige object being worn as show. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value, but it has a very, very different function. And there's huge quantities of this gold going out of the empire. Here, just a map of, for example, of gold outside the empire in Germany. These are payments going to the Franks, and this is exactly what was done with the denarii. Protect the frontier. The Franks are protecting the frontier of the Lower Rhine. And actually they did. In the early 5th century, when the barbarian invasion started, the Franks were loyal to Rome and helped Rome fight the invaders. But it's very important to understand the enormity of what is going on. These are maps by Kirill Mizgin showing the distribution of imitations of Roman coins, gold and silver outside the empire. There is this huge mass of stuff in the Ukraine. The border at the bottom is partly due to the international border of Moldova, but it also does relate to to a cultural boundary. This is the Cherniakov Sant'Ada de Mureș culture. These are the Goths. And if you look at this and start to understand the huge amount of silver and gold that the Goths had, you can then start to understand what was going on between Rome and the Goths. The Goths were becoming a superpower that were now then going to become a dangerous enemy for Rome. You can start to see on this production of imitations and also the amount of coinage we're finding there generally, the enormous power and the enormous wealth and therefore power of the Goths. Now, in their book, The Dawn, Graeber and Wenroe point out something that whenever you have a centralized urban culture, on the periphery, you normally get a martial elite arising. That basically the power and the wealth of this central urbanized culture leads to the growth of a martial, a warlike society on its borders. And this seems to be exactly what's happening with the Goths and with the Germans generally outside the empire through late antiquity. And if we look at again, just comparing things, at the top here on the left, there's very little gold going out, generally speaking, but wrong way around. There's very little denarii going out, but what we're finding in the 3rd century is that the gold started to increase. There's little gold going out in the 2nd, it's going out in the 3rd century. Gold is going out, and we're starting to see this gold, for example, in burials, and we're starting to get very, very rich burials. We're starting to see some sort of elite arising, and they're showing themselves off with Roman coins. Here, the Prince of Goman in Thuringia, mid-3rd century AD, or the Princess of Hasleben, which is a little later, but again, gold, lots of Roman stuff in these tombs. What we're starting to see here, we can see it happening through the 3rd century, is this export of material is starting to starting to fuel the creation of an elite. And so basically what we can say about this Roman frontier policy is they're paying out in subsidies. A lot of it is probably related to the Marcomannic Wars, where they're paying Germans to basically stay loyal to Rome and help them against the Marcomanni. Severus stops the payment of silver. It gets resumed in gold in the 4th century with these gold medallions. And these Roman coins in the Northern Barbaricum are intrinsically bound up with the elites. The silver forms the basis of a system of the circulation of value as a social currency or a social purpose money, restricted to a small elite group of German society. And its distribution, as revealed by imitations, reflects long-range links between elite groups. Gold basically becomes an object for the display of prestige. It's used as an article of attire, and we find gold in elite burials. The gold-plated imitations are also interesting because it suggests that actually this idea of wearing something golden trickles down, generally speaking. And that this intensification of the occurrence of gold and of silver imitations coincides with the appearance of rich elite burials in central Germany. And so the question is, what role did coins play in the manifestation of hierarchy and the development of elites in Germanic society? And my suggestion would be it plays a huge role. It builds up this system for payment and for storage of wealth, which changes Germanic society, leads to the rise of the elites, with the result of people like the Goths appearing. And apologies for running a little bit over time, but thank you very much.